Hi.
Hello, anyone there?
Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
I
there
forgot
we
my
go.
little.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Pretty darn good. Thank you so much for doing this. I really
Oh, yeah, I'm
appreciate
so
it.
excited.
All right,
No,
all
I'm
right.
stoked.
Let's get the jitters out of the way a little bit because I'm getting really psyched. How are things where you are? Where are you at?
Thank- so I live in the Midwest. I live in the Quad Cities. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Originally I'm from Chicago, but I live in the Quad Cities now, which is like almost 3 hours.
Oh, really?
Uh,
I have no idea
yeah.
where it is. I'm sorry,
Oh, no, it's
but
okay. It's
you know, when I tell people that I'm from Wyoming and that I was raised in Wyoming, they're like, I don't even know what that is. I don't even know what you're saying right now. So-
so yeah. I live in Iowa, so I get it. I
oh,
get
nice, nice.
it.
Hey,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very excited to chat with you because you have been doing something pretty remarkable with your collaborations, with your projects that you're putting together. I do want to congratulate you too on your recent, you met a fundraising goal, right?
I
For your
did.
podcast,
Yeah.
which is pretty awesome. So congrats on that because
Thank
that's
you.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I
Can
appreciate
you,
that.
I want to like go a whole bunch of different places, but I kind of wanted
Hmm.
to start at the beginning if that's okay. Um,
Absolutely.
you work with your siblings, right?
I do. I do.
How cool is that? As a
It,
writer, as a creative, can you give me a little bit to kind of get started? Like,
of course, it's the most natural thing in the world because as kids, we would start stories as kids when we were bored, and we would just like I'd start a story, and then my brother Ernesto would go, and then Angel would finish it, and like it'd start off one way, and it would end up like this crazy, most ridiculous story at the end. So
yeah,
it's kind of something we'd always done like, and we would do it in really random times, like we would do it in church, like we would like I'd start it like we wouldn't be paying attention, we'd start like a story on
no, that's
the like the flyer, and then we would
right.
just like pass it over to each other, so it's something we've always done, so it's very natural for
Okay.
us to do it, but it's definitely not without its difficulties because sometimes I'm like, how would a professional person handle this in the situation and not necessarily like a sister whose brother is annoying her,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
vice versa,
that's true
you
because
know?
I can imagine there has to be some difficulty with the separation of the tasks and the duties, but in terms of the content that you guys are creating, I
Mhm.
mean the quality is outstanding and
Oh,
everything is
thank
kind of
you.
on that wonderful level of expectation, right? Where you're writing this character, and I started listening to Meteor City
Mhm.
first. I'm hoping to get through it here by the end of the week of that first season, and I'm really drawn by just the characterization of this person that you created. And it's such an interesting way to get into that world that it was really kind of sucking me into it, and I just kind of
Mhm.
want to keep learning more about what's going to happen. But you know, credit to you, but also credit to your siblings who are able to kind of match that.
Oh,
I always think
absolutely.
that's kind of interesting. Is like you got some pieces that are really just 100%, and then there's always these other parts that might not be,
Hmm.
functioning 100%.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you have these expectations that are just out of left field, or that maybe you have a hard time like articulating to some of your
Oh,
collaborators?
absolutely. Yes. Well, when I first started with audio, I first off, I fell in love with the medium, and I was like, I want to do this. And then I had no idea how to do it. Zero. I had zero idea how to write for audio. I've been a storyteller my whole life, but writing for audio is so different. And so my brother, yeah, go
Oh
ahead.
no, go ahead. Sorry,
Okay. No, it's okay. My brothers and I, we had zero idea, but we just like, I came up with a story, and I was like, it has to be audio, it has
Mhm.
to be. And then we were kind of figuring it out, but we definitely had these big expectations. Like we're all a little bit of perfectionists in the way, and we're like, we want to do it and we want to make this good.
Mm.
But you have to be bad first to get good. And
Right, right.
that's the very tricky part for me, is that you do have to be bad first to get good.
So, what specifically about the story do you think made you go that direction for audio narrative?
Well, it actually started when I visited Detroit in 2017. This is my third time in Detroit, and
Mm.
the city is both so alive, and so much has also just it's been hurt so much, and there's parts of it that are dead. But the duality of being such a lively city, but also dealing with such economic and foundational problems in the city just really inspired me. And you know how like every city has a vibe, right? Like New
Yeah.
York, Chicago, LA, and Detroit is no different than that. And like you can, if you close your eyes, like you can hear the city. And it was
Mm,
screaming to me that it had to be audio. And then from there, I was driving home from Detroit, and this story just kind of started, making itself. It definitely made itself at home in my head for a long
mm.
time. And I didn't even want to acknowledge that I was going to pursue audio because I had no idea how to do
So
it.
as soon as you left Detroit, you were already formulating this. This was like already something that was just kind of magnetizing in your head, and all these pieces were coming together for it. Is that kind of like,
Well, yes and no, because when I was leaving Detroit, there was this, I was driving through this neighborhood, there was this rundown neighborhood, and literally it said future home of Whole Foods. And it made me laugh,
wow?
but also at the same time, you're like, you have this clear and obvious problem, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
then like, okay, let's build a Whole Foods here, and like that's gonna solve the problem. And that right there is just like having to see the gentrification of cities and
Mm.
the heartbreak and the trauma that comes
Oh,
with
for
that.
sure.
Um, and there are parts of Detroit that never recovered from the 2008, economic disaster. And so that's kind of, it was like parts of the city looks like it was hit by a disaster. Okay, natural
Mm.
disaster, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I got Motor City to Meteor City.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, Bianca is like a very much the main character is very much a real person to me. She's kind of like this
Mm.
like this alter ego of myself in some ways. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to like
Oh, that's
Meteor
so great.
City.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I love that because out of something that is just kind of like a very small connection, you start elevating the metaphor, right? Like just making this
Mhm.
thing just bigger. And really, I mean, in the context of the story, it's just such a massive alternative history thing that you got going on with it that it's really it's just really exciting, like a really exciting premise. But in terms of developing your work, I mean, how long did this take to come together? Because I mean, what we're seeing, or excuse me, what we're hearing now is
Mhm.
so potent and very well fleshed out and everything. How long did it take you to go from that to what we have now, season one?
Well, I got to this point where I had pushed my creativity down so much that when I started to write Meteor City, it was like it just kind of started pouring out. So I
Mm.
wrote the entire season one of Meteor City in about 6 weeks.
Oh wow, yeah.
And I was just like spilling out every night. I was working on it after work. And then I read it and the first draft, I was like, oh, this is crap. So I had to go back. But it was good. And then the second time I rewrote it, it was less crap. And then I did a third rewrite, and that's what we have now. And so it took all together about 3 months to write it. And then the production part happened.
Mm.
And that took a long time.
Did you
Because
start
you have
delegating some things to siblings, or was it more like, okay, this is how we're gonna go now? Or what's that process
um
of collaboration like with you guys?
yeah, so we all have our different strengths. I'm definitely I'm the writer. My brother Angel, he's the audio engineer, he's the composer. My brother Ernesto is the
Which is
videographer.
awesome.
So we all have these different strengths. So for the first portion of it was just me. And they were definitely there when I needed to vent, but like I said, we had no idea what we were doing. So
Mm.
they had no way of helping me, right? Um, so it didn't get to the point until after I casted, and then I was like, okay, I have these voice actors. Now what? And then I was like, oh, I guess I have to learn how to direct. So I had to learn how to direct. And then yeah, and then we started thinking of like, how do we want the city to feel? How do we want the sound? Like, what does
Mhm.
Bianca sound like when she's breathing or having a nightmare? Or what does Dee's diner sound like?
Yeah.
So that's where all of the creative I think our powers kind of
Mhm.
molded into one. We're like, no, we think that Bianca would walk this way,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like, so
Yeah.
it was kind of that's how we all came together to make Meteor City what it is.
Right, right.
Mhm.
In terms of creating this or assembling this group of folks who are helping you bring this to life, you have a great array of actors from what I've heard so
Mhm.
far in this particular series, and I'll keep bugging you about other stuff later, but specifically
Mhm.
with with Meteor City, because it's so big in scope, how does one go about the recruitment and engagement and all of these things to really sell this idea to a group of collaborators, like, actors that you want to bring in?
That's a good question. So I think social media is the biggest tool. If you look at it in a area where you have a vibrant theater community, I'm sure that it's a lot easier. But then I didn't. So I literally, it started out as me tweeting on Twitter. I was like, "Hey, does anyone know how to cast for an audio drama?"
Oh, that's
And
beautiful. I
that's
love that.
literally how it started.
I'm telling you. Okay, so this is why this is incredibly inspiring. Like, I see what you're doing, and I find myself in a similar situation here in Wyoming, where there are some networks. I mean, having grown up here and having gone to theater and been a theater kid for a
Mhm.
while here, yes, it's easy, but there's still those times where I'm like, where's the actual built-in scene,
Mhm.
right? That's going to help you get over the line, and it's just so incredibly inspiring, because to me, this is one of those things where we can point and say, look, you can will this to happen. This can be a
Right.
thing. You just have to, you know, push as much as you can,
Yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah, absolutely. It is hard because you have to put yourself out there. And the hardest thing for me is that you have to be okay with showing up as a person who's trying to do something.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that's the most embarrassing thing in the world for me to
Oh,
like
I get
openly
it.
say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I want to make this and I care about this." But I know a lot of creative people who are scared to talk
Hmm.
to like admit that to the world.
Yeah.
Because what if I fail? What if I can't make it the way? Like, what if I make it and it's crap?
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I literally started with me tweeting and I was like, "Hey, I need help." And someone was like, "Actually, I know someone who's in an audio drama." And then I tweeted, then I messaged them and they're like, "Oh yeah, I know someone who has this show." So literally it was just like a mail of me just like DMing
Wow.
people on Twitter to figure it out.
That's
Because
amazing.
back now there's a lot more resources, right? There's a lot of
Sure.
it's grown, it's exploded in the last couple of years.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was literally just me tweeting and someone directing me to someone who directed me to someone who I found like voice acting Twitter. And
Oh,
then
that's
I had to
great.
like then I put a casting call. Yeah.
So, how far spread out are these folks who collaborated on this project?
I mean, they're all over the world. The main character, her name's Daisy Gavetta, she lives in New York.
Hmm.
But the rest of the cast is mostly in the US, a couple international, and we meet on Discord mostly. We talk. There is usually how most of our communication is done.
Wow.
So yeah, it's completely virtual. I would love to be able to record in person someday.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, we're all spread out. Hmm.
So, when you were first starting out doing this kind of creative work, did you do any kind of theater, or did you do just writing primarily, or what was the angle?
Well, a little bit of both.
Okay.
So I did theater like when I was younger, and I loved it. But I found that I loved being behind stage as much as I loved being on stage.
Hmm.
And I think in high school, and also it came with all the emotional trauma that can happen in theater, right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's taxing. It is
it
a very
is,
daunting thing.
And then I was like, I think I'm ready to put the being on stage part, and I want to make something come to life. Like I want to be that person that someone shows up to be in my show.
Oh,
Like that feeling of like people wanting to be involved in something is so humbling and so exciting at the same time.
oh,
Mhm.
that's amazing. So now, in terms of season two, how is that looking in terms of a time frame? Have you guys kind of started laying that out, or is that still a?
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, we hit our Indiegogo fundraiser, which was amazing, and so exciting and humbling at the same time. Um, but yeah, so we kind of started thinking. We compiled all of the audio from our incredible cast, and yeah, so kind of the end of the year is really where we're going to focus on getting it done. My guess is kind of spring
Mm,
of 2022, of trying to learn from my mistakes from the first season, because it's hard to be consistent when you're
yeah,
working with voice actors who
sure.
are on different projects and stuff like that. So
Mm.
yeah, but we're kicking it up a notch. We're leveling up.
Oh, yeah.
We're creating original scores for every episode
Oh, my
and
word.
including more music, and yeah, so I'm very excited for season two.
Oh, it's amazing. So, if somebody were to begin, and I'm asking for a friend, mostly myself, uh, because I do love the narrative perspective of this medium. What are some takeaways of the last of, like, say, calling season one a complete project?
Mhm.
What are the biggest lessons that you think you've taken away from such a huge undertaking?
That's a good question. I'd say leave your pride at the door. Don't, I think as creatives, we want to be, especially with social media, like we want to be perceived as like having our shit together, like being the best that we can be. And it's totally okay to be like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. Someone help me. Because I found that most people want to help. Like if it's a simple, hey, actually, you should be using this sound effect or check out this program. I feel like generally people um, want to help you, and it's just allowing yourself to be helped. That
Mm,
was one thing that really helped me back, and I think that's the biggest thing. And I think another one would just be whatever timeline you have for a show, triple it. Triple it. Because you really want to build in all the mistakes that you're gonna make.
oh yeah.
If you're anything like me and anyone listening is like me, I don't learn unless I'm like falling flat on my face. Right. But I never stopped getting up. And I
Mm,
didn't, even when I was writing season two, I was like, okay, I re-listened to season one and I wrote all the ways that I didn't like it, everything I loved about it. I read some reviews, not all reviews on the show, because it's a whole different topic.
mm,
I was like, okay, how did I excel in this, and how could I improve?
mhm,
Right. And then I allowed myself to just take time to really figure out how I'm going to fail this season and how I can improve. So I wanted to give myself time to just learn and get better.
mm,
I think especially with audio fiction, I think, and our social media, like we want content to be so instant, and
mhm.
like we want projects to be out, and we want, because we want to stay relevant. We
Oh,
want to
for
stay in
sure.
people's queues.
Yeah.
So there's a pressure to like make something. And I was like, no, I'm gonna take the time with it so that when I hit published, it's gonna be the best thing that I could do with what I have.
Mhm.
So I'd say definitely leave your pride at the door and give yourself time to figure out what you want it to be, and don't sacrifice that
Oh, it's
to be
amazing.
timely. Yeah.
Very cool. Do you dabble in other types of writing, or what kind of forms of writing were you trying before?
Well, I mean, I've submitted some short stories to places. I kept a lot of writing to myself. I like poetry. I love especially short stories. I love speculative short stories. That's my heart. um, and yeah, so I was like, yeah, I can write. I can write a play, right? I used to write plays all the time. When I was younger and I was a kid, I used to write like Powerpuff Girl fan fiction
Oh, that's the
when I was
best.
like 8 years old, right? I was like, I can do this. I can do
You
this.
you need to have like a hymn spin-off of some
Yeah.
kind. If not, I would have been very disappointed.
Right. So I was like, I'm confident I can do this. And then I was, oh, I have to figure out how to do this. And it's so weird when you're writing and you have to take away like your major senses, and like
Mhm.
how does this feel? And I think audio is such an incredible medium to tell stories because it's so intimate.
Mm.
It's you and the other, it's you and the cast. They're right in front of you. So it was definitely a learning process for sure.
Mm. So, when you're directing for this kind of content, are there is there anything in particular that you try to focus on as a director when you're guiding some of these actors, especially being so scattered, you are
Mhm.
doing everything online, I imagine, like you said, over Discord. What is the hardest thing of collaborating over such distances?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm very fortunate to have such a talented cast, but there are times where you do lose something a little bit when you don't do it in person. You I try my best for it to sound organic and to have that chemistry. When you're
Mhm.
running lines with someone in person, you can feed off their energy and how they're delivering their lines. Whereas, um, when you're looking at the script, you're kind of guessing how the other character is going to
Mm,
say it. So that was definitely that's part's tricky. So it's a lot of like, hey, can you run lines with this person?
mm,
Or like, hey, you did great in the scene, but this other person did do so great. So can you just be there with them, running lines what they're reporting? Even that itself makes a world of difference when you listen and it feels like they're in the same room. When Daisy's in, New York and other characters in LA,
mm.
you want them to feel
Yeah.
like they're in the same scene,
Yeah, yeah. And it was pretty seamless, I gotta say. I mean, in terms of audio
Oh, thank
production,
you.
shout out to your brother, or if you guys were doing that
Yeah.
together, just the polish of the thing was just very impressive. And it's been a treat
Oh,
so
thank you. I
far.
appreciate that.
Like I love the hell out of it. But in terms of your other podcast,
Thanks.
when did that one start, or is that something that is going concurrently right now?
Yeah, it's called Coven Cast: A Disaster's Guide to Magic, and it's a comedy completely different than Meteor City, where Meteor City is dark and serious with very little levity, and Coven Cast is just an absurd show about a group of witches who start a podcast. So it's very meta, right? Um, so
Love
that
that.
actually started in like 2009, and it started with my best friend Amber, who also writes. She's also a writer, and we were like, let's write this show about a group of badass witches who
Mm.
have to figure out what they're doing, very much like us, like we're just going after it, no idea what we're doing, but we're
Right.
figuring it out. And so that's still going at the same time. So yeah, I'm working with two different casts at the same time.
But it's got to be a
it's
nice
it,
break, right? I mean,
it is.
because the nature of the first podcast, like you said, is so heavy. Like I imagine having that levity
Yeah,
has got to be pretty nice.
it really, really is, because people who know me in real life and listen to me your city, they're like, oh my God, you write that? Because I'm a very goofy person. Like I'm a very
Yeah,
like I'm always laughing and cracking jokes. And when they hear that, they're like, what? But then when they listen
yeah,
to Coven Cast, they're like, oh, okay, that sounds like you.
yeah.
So
That's
it's
so
nice to
funny.
have both. Hmm.
Awesome. What was I going to ask you? In terms of overcoming challenges, I think that there's something super important because, like you said, to have that openness, especially online, because everything is just moving at a rate that we just can't excel. I mean, no matter how hard we try,
Hmm.
just being on social media and being open about what's working and what isn't, I think is incredibly helpful. Have you ever had moments where you just feel like, oh, this shit isn't working? I really can't do this anymore. What are some things that you go to, or some anchors that you might have in your creative pursuits that help you
Hmm.
overcome that? Or can you give me a little bit on
Yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely. There's been so many times where I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I stressing about this?
Mm,
Why am I putting so much effort into something, And then you're like, is this actually making a difference? And all of these, things are, your brain is just racing. And there's so many moments where I was just like, this isn't worth it. I'm gonna give up. But then I go back and I listen to the shows I started listening to, and then they still give me chills. I still have to stop what I'm doing and just fall deep
mhm,
into the story. And I was like, oh, that's why
mhm,
I want to do that to someone. I want someone to stop making dinner because they have to pay attention. And that type of that feeling of
mm.
giving another listener that is what pushes me through.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like, and yeah, and just to have I think it's so hard to start and finish something, and that
Mhm.
feeling when you finish something is cannot be underestimated.
Yeah.
So knowing that feel, anticipating that you're like, okay, season two is done, and then you're like, oh my God, I made something.
Oh, yeah.
I also do it for that
So you gotta
feeling.
hold on to that feeling of, "Hey,
Yeah.
this is a big win. This is kind of a big
Hmm.
deal."
Yeah.
Um, how's, how's the family, dynamic, in terms of you and your siblings being creative? Is that something that is a supportive environment for you, like, with family, or is that something that's always been kind of an okay thing for your folks, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've always been this way. So we've always been, and my mom especially is very creative in very different ways. So I think creativity has always been, it manifests itself in a lot of different ways, whether you're actually creating something or you're just a creative person, where, my mom is has an incredible green thumb. And
Mhm.
to me, that's so creative because from a plot of land, she can make this incredible garden,
Mm,
and that takes creativity,
yeah.
so it was always something that was deeply rooted in us. And a lot of it was our environment,
Mm,
a lot of times it wasn't the best. So creativity and storytelling was our escape
sure.
for most of our lives,
Hmm.
So I think that is kind of where it took root.
Mm,
And a lot of times when things are uncertain, I turn to stories.
mm,
I turn to, whether that's
yeah.
watching TV or reading or listening to audio fiction, that's where I turn to. So it's very natural.
Right. Yeah, would you consider it very boring in Iowa, or would you consider it very exciting now? Like just as a place to grow up?
Mhm. um, a little bit of both. I think, well, we actually grew up
You said
in
Chicago, right?
Chicago.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, but we moved to Iowa later in
Uh-huh.
life.
What was that
And
like in Chicago? Was that pretty intense, or was it?
well, yes and no. A little bit not,
Uh-huh.
But Wrightwood Studios, which is our production company, is actually named after the street of the house that Abuelita lived in. She lived on Wrightwood Avenue. So
Oh,
Wrightwood
that's
Studios
great.
comes from the house that was really the thing that solidified our childhood. We're a place where she lived in this big house where we'd run around all day and we'd get into trouble and we would hide around. We just got to be kids there.
Oh, that's
And that was
amazing.
definitely like our safe space to just be kids and to dream and to like just
Oh,
play.
how
So
cool
that's
is
kind of
that? Like to have that as a title, that's pretty badass. That's pretty
yeah,
great.
yeah. Thank you. So that's definitely like, an ode to the freedom of just expression.
Mm,
But living in Iowa definitely has its challenges. But for a long time I wanted to leave. And then I had this thought as I'm getting older that, I don't need to be in LA to
mm.
make anything. I don't need to be in New York. I
Oh
don't need to
yeah,
be anywhere than where I'm at to do the thing I want to do.
that's right.
And I think I dare any creative to like take that off your shoulders, that pressure to live in a city you can't afford to live in. Like
Oh man,
I felt
yeah.
it for so long. And then I was like, no, I'm doing the damn thing here. And
Mm.
if there's not a community, then it's my job to create the community that I want to be in. So that's what we're doing with Wrightwood.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do have this kind of what do you call it? Like a sticking point with childhood. I always kind of make it a point to bring this up because I just find that there's some artists who just have this, like you were saying, this innate built-in sense of wonder that doesn't go away. When you were a kid, do you think that there were hardships that were pushing away your creativity at some point in time, or did you feel like, no, this is just who I am, and heaven or hell be damned, this is me, this is who I'm going to be?
It was a little bit of both. I think creativity was a way that I could disassociate from my reality in a way where when I had zero control of my surroundings, I could write, I could read, I used to put on like little plays in my room. And
Sure.
it was a way that the only thing I could control was what I could create,
Mm,
you know?
yeah.
And as I got older, when I was a teenager, that was something I tried to suppress because, being a teenager is hard and
Yeah.
you're always trying to fit in.
Yeah.
So that I did, as I got older, I did lose that. And then, you get jobs and life happens and all of
Hmm.
that. And you're like, oh, I'll write that someday. But I was working in a job that the way I describe it is I was creatively constipated. That's the
Oh,
way
I
I
love
describe
that.
it.
I'm going to write that down because that might be one of my favorite new expressions.
Yeah. So instead of writer's block, that's what it was. And I was
Yeah.
just like, if I don't do something creative, I literally feel like it's just gonna be like a Super Saiyan moment. I'm just gonna like go through it. I'm just gonna explode. Like that's how I felt.
Yeah.
Like I'm just gonna lose it. And then that's when it was so kismet. That's when I had to go to Detroit for work. And then,
Mm,
Meteor City came at the moment that I needed it. Like I
yeah.
felt like I was gonna burst.
Do you have like mentally frustrating jobs or more like labor intensive jobs or like because that's always been my difficulty like in the last 10 years I've always been in front of a computer and now I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like I get home and I'm like I don't have anything left in the tank. I've been
Yeah.
staring at that light
Yeah.
for the last 10
Yeah,
hours.
at the time I was a grant writer.
Ooh.
So I would literally
Oh my
write
word.
grants for like 10 hours a day, right? So
Yeah,
I was still writing, but it was like what it, and it's so weird because even grant writing, there was some type of storytelling involved in it, but it
sure.
wasn't with the stories I wanted to tell.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I would come home and I would be sitting writing all day. And I was like, oh, the idea of writing anymore, even if it's for
Yeah,
me, it was exhausting.
yeah.
So yeah, it was, yeah.
Oof, that's insane. Did you develop any kind of writing habits after that? Like just to combat that? Because I think that, there's a lot of creatives who can just push through that stuff. And I've never been that kind of person. I just give up very easily.
Yeah, same, same. When I don't feel like writing, I read. And that helps me because I think of, I, I think most books, or I reread a lot of the books that I know are going
Hmm.
to give me the feeling that I want.
Oh, okay.
Right. So, like, I'm looking at right there in the corner, Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist
Okay.
is one of my favorite books of all time. And
Oh,
every
great.
time I read it, I get a different reaction. And I've read it probably like 12 times now.
Mm.
And I'll read it and I was like, yep, I'm good. I'm good. I remember the feeling that I want to give someone and I want to give myself. And that kind of snaps me out of it.
Mm.
So I tend to go back to things that I know are going to kick my butt.
That's great. Do you
Yeah.
bookmark any of that stuff? Because I think that I've never thought about that, but like maybe like highlighting or bookmarking that special thing that just kind of lit up that
I
creative moment.
do.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one copy of it and I've had it since high school and it's very torn. I'm pretty sure I stole it too. I don't even think, I think I was supposed to like put it back in the bin. I think I just was like, no, this is
Yeah,
mine.
it's all good.
Um,
Werner Herzog stole his first camera. You're fine.
right,
You'll be okay.
right. Yeah, and I scribble and I've underlined and I've dog-eared and I know sometimes I'll just go to a page that I
Yeah.
know that it's what I needed to hear.
Yeah. So outside of The
Mhm.
Alchemist, what other works have influenced your kind of helped shape your creative vision, like who you are now as a writer?
Oh, when it comes to the audio storytelling, the first show I listened to was a show called The Black Tapes.
Yeah.
And and it was very big in its time.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, this is so cool. If I could make something that someone could listen to at their brain dead job, then I would feel so creatively fulfilled because that's what I was listening to,
Mm.
like I was listening to this like supernatural mystery when I was like writing government grants, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So I was like, all right. So yeah, and there's so many other shows, but um
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
Do you have a big one from childhood that sticks with you?
Um there were a lot, but I'd say I think it's a classic, A Wrinkle in Time. I think that's a classic
Mm.
for a reason.
Hmm.
You know, anything that had would have a girl who dares to take up space, to be
Hmm.
big, to dream,
Yeah. Yeah.
was one that always resonated with me.
And it's a great thing that you're kind of paying forward in a way because you are creating these female protagonists of color, and that's just such an important gap to fill right
Mhm.
now that it is pretty exciting. But did you ever have anything like that you felt like, oh, these are like my heroes of color? Not to, I just kind of think that I never really had a lot of those, like
Mhm.
my hero was Chespirito on Univision,
Mhm.
and
Right.
like I never want to go with Speedy Gonzalez because I'm just like,
Right,
yeah,
right.
that's about all I had, in Wyoming.
Mhm.
Um
Right.
did you have any mentors or any people that you looked up to?
I didn't. Not then. But I definitely have more now than I did when
Mm,
I was a kid. And sometimes that I like to think of I'm still kind of mentoring a younger Madeline because sometimes
mm,
I was working on something recently that I was like, if I could go back in time and tell 15-year-old Madeline what I'm doing now, she would flip out. So a lot of times I'm just like, I need to be that person that I didn't see. And
mhm,
I think for audio, it's allowed me to do that because when I fell in love with audio storytelling, I was looking for podcasts. I couldn't find a single Latina in the entire audio fiction, like not
mhm.
one,
Yeah,
right? And I was like, this can't be another medium. This can't be another thing that I love. There's no representation.
yeah.
And so I made it a pact. And I was like, every show I have, there will be a Latina lead, right? Because I am giving myself permission to be the lead character.
Mm-hmm.
And whether a 15-year-old girl hears the show and she thinks Bianca is this badass woman who does what she wants, she takes up space, she's not afraid to be who she is,
Mm-hmm.
then that's a way that I can be that role model for a
Yeah.
younger me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do you think there's a problem in like current mainstream entertainment circles still with in terms of visibility? Do you think that there's a
Mhm.
long way to go, or do you think we're kind of getting there in a way, or will we ever get there?
I definitely think we're getting better. I think we're still hitting, we're not hitting the mark yet, but I think we are getting better, and it's because of work of our own. No
Mm-hmm.
one's ever going to give us a seat at the table,
Mm-hmm.
ever, right? And I think there are a lot of people who've had to fight to be seen and to be heard, and I don't think the fight is gone, but I think we're making a little, some progress, but whether that's television or podcast, we still have a long way to go. But I think that we're finally ready. I think a lot of people have been fighting, but I think most of us are ready to fight and be like, no,
Mm-hmm.
we deserve to do this. We
Oh
deserve
yeah.
to make it. We're the lead,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not going to tell us otherwise. So
Yeah.
we're in the progress. We're in the
Yeah,
progress.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you answering that, because I have this back and forth kind of feeling where I because I feel like sometimes creatively, especially, in terms of writing Latino characters, writing Mexican
Mhm.
characters, who are very true to my culture and who I am, I always feel like, is this am I pushing too far? Is this activism? Should I not be
Mhm.
even thinking about that? Do you ever feel like you get kind of in your head too much about that?
Oh, absolutely. I went back and forth because Bianca, she is Afro Latina, and she is angry. She's strong, she's opinionated, and I was like, I didn't want her to be perceived as an angry black woman,
Mhm.
or this feisty Latina. Like, I didn't want her to be perceived as that, because we're already perceived as that.
Yeah.
So there was just like, I don't want her to be a stereotype, but I also want her to be who she is.
Mm.
And so I definitely had to get used to that feeling. And I was like, okay, someone might not like this, but someone might love this. Someone might hate this, and someone would be like, oh, she's a stereotype, or someone would be like, she's just like me. So
Uh-huh.
there's line that you have to walk. And so
Mhm.
I kind of started incorporating other things that, for example, like Gloria, Bianca's mom in the show, is very much my mother. She's, very much religious. She's a warrior, right?
Uh-huh.
So I was like, how can I incorporate my culture in the way of like kind of
Mhm.
an emotional, manipulative mother, right? Where you're never going to meet these expectations that she sets for
Yeah,
you.
why does that sound so familiar? I have no
Right.
idea. But my sisters tell me I get a pass because I'm a guy. So I think that might be just a continuous cultural thing.
Right.
Uh, but in terms of like Iowa, where you're at now, um, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I kind of want to ask you more about it in terms of community, because I think that you've done something amazing by starting to create your own thing, and of course not needing to be anywhere else. What do you think Iowa needs, in particular where you are, that would make it a great thriving place? Because I'm using kind of Iowa in terms of like an analog for my situation, because it's I
Yeah.
think they're very close. They're kind of
Mhm.
cousins in a way.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I'm very fortunate to where I live, which I live like on the Mississippi River. So there's two sides in Illinois, two sides in Iowa, called the Quad Cities.
Okay.
So it's very, very close. And I'm actually very fortunate because it has a pretty lively community as far as art goes, but no one is quite doing audio.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We have a lot of performers, we have some playhouses,
Mm-hmm.
and so many incredible musicians. Um, but no one's quite doing what I'm doing. And
Mm-hmm.
the way that I change that is to tell people what I'm doing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really scary. I went to this networking thing where you had to stand up and you had to like say who you are and what you do.
Oh
And I
man.
almost threw up.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. I could. I.
it's terrifying.
Oh my word.
So because I think that most of the time, especially when it comes to creative things, once you stand up in a room full of people and be like, you know what, I'm doing this thing, people are going to be like, that's so cool. I could
Mm-hmm.
never do that. Tell me more.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know what? I actually know someone who kind of thought about doing that. Let me connect you. Right. And
Oh,
that's how
great.
it starts. It
Mm-hmm.
was like, of you having, you know, knowing that you want to do something and having the nerve to stand up and say, hey, I'm doing this. Who wants to be involved? That sometimes that's all it takes. And sometimes it takes a long time. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I started out, no one cared. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like, no, it was like, okay, cool. Like, I don't know what
Like,
that
all
is.
right.
What's a podcast? You know, occasionally my mom will ask me how my iPod is doing. And it was like, it's a podcast, mom.
Oh, that's the
You
sweetest thing ever. But
know?
listen, that seems to be a compliment, though. The fact that
Right.
they asked.
Right. So yeah, it's definitely that. But I think being in a place like Iowa or Wyoming, it does feel like you're all alone. And I think social media can bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you know, if you're in a place in the middle of nowhere, but you can be on Twitter asking questions, and you can have people who are working, who are like full-time voice actors or full-time producers answering questions on Twitter, then you're a part of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you, whether you're actually doing it or you're trying to learn how to do it, you're still a part of that community as long as you're interactive in it.
Mm.
So, mhm.
Oh, that's great. Really awesome stuff. What do you think is on the horizon for you? I know that you're going to be working on season 2, but
Mhm.
in terms of other things that are kind of in the process of picking up steam or things that you're thinking about creating, are you sticking with the audio medium or are you looking at other things?
Um, a little bit of both. I did write a two-act play with another podcast called Feminist Fairy Tales.
Okay.
And I wrote a two-act play. It's a Thumbelina retelling. It's called Lena. It's about a first-gen Latina woman who learns that she doesn't have to stay small just because people in her life
Oh,
want
I
to make
love
her
that.
small.
That's a great
Yeah.
imagery. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very excited for that. But because Wrightwood, we are multimedia because I write to my brother. He's a musician and produces, you know, music,
Hmm.
and Esther is an incredible filmmaker.
Yeah.
We always knew that we wanted to do more than audio. So in
Uh-huh.
2022, we have a couple short films in
Oh,
the works
great.
that we are going to start working on and collaborating with some local artists here. So yeah, definitely lots of moving parts happening.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
Mhm.
What movies are you watching right now?
Oh
Any
man.
movies that are catching your attention?
I haven't honestly, I have not watched a movie in for so long. Um, I think like I part of me I feel robbed by that. Like I don't know if it's because of social media or like sitcoms,
Mm.
but my attention span is like 30 minutes and under.
So how about shows? Are you watching any shows?
Oh, I feel so bad. I rewatch shows like crazy, but I actually started The Last Kingdom on Netflix, which is not something that I would watch,
The Last
which is
Kingdom.
like,
What's that one about?
so it's about like Vikings and like,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that kind of sounds familiar. Yeah.
so yeah, I not something I would usually gravitate towards,
Yeah.
but the storytelling is really incredible.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I can get into this. And now I'm like in like season 4. So yeah.
Yeah, that's how it happens. It just kind of sucks you in and
Mhm.
you can't turn away. We just after so much fanfare on the internet, we finally started watching Ted Lasso. And I'm a soccer guy. I follow the leagues and everything. I'm like,
Right.
why didn't I watch this? This is like the greatest thing ever. And I don't
And
know.
it's
It's
I have not watched it yet, but I've heard like not a single bad thing about it.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm very excited
Well, I
about
get
it.
very suspicious about that too when they're like, there's I don't know, there's
Right.
always gonna be something. I know I'm not gonna like it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But no, I mean I think that it's a wonderful thing to keep our eyes open and to see if we can always take in more information to make the art better.
Mhm.
Um Lastly, I wanted to ask you, unless you wanted to add something else, I wanted to touch base with you on any advice or final bits of advice or encouragement for folks who maybe have a full time job, maybe don't feel like they can get to where they need to be, are experiencing a struggle. Um, can you share a little bit about what they could do
Mhm.
to get back on track or to pursue this thing that they have in their soul, the creative impulse?
Mhm. Yeah, I'd say sit down and write your why. I think that's so important. I think that's overused a lot, so people don't take it necessarily serious. But I think as creative people, when we ask ourselves, why do we have to do this? Like, is it something you want to do? And great, you're going to do it. But if you're the person that no matter how hard you try, you can't ignore it,
Mm.
and I think a lot of creative people are, especially storytellers, then you need to ask yourself why,
Mm.
right? Like, why can I not shake this feeling about this short story? Or why do I have to make this film or write this play? And
Hmm.
once you figure out your why, you're going to figure out your how. And it somehow will work out. You're like, all right, I have to do it because this is honoring someone I love, or I have to do it because if I don't, I'll go crazy like I did, right? Whatever your why is, then you say, okay, so this is, I have to do this because I need an outlet for my creativity. And I'm going to do it by starting just by writing one character and seeing how they fit. Right. And it's almost like you have to take the step without seeing the next stair. And then once you do, you'll finally get to the level you need to be on. You just will. You kind of just have to surrender to creativity and it will get you to where you need to go. Absolutely.
Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful note to end on. And Madelyn, I want to thank you for your time. And hopefully we can chat again because I'm just like asking everyone, hey, if you want to come back on, or if you want to bring your brothers, just come and talk to us.
Yeah.
That's would be amazing because we could talk about process a little bit more. We could talk about what's coming up in season 2 because now I'm very intrigued, and I
No,
really
this has been wonderful.
yeah. But keep in touch. I'll bug you on Instagram, and please let us know where to find you. Where are we going to find your work?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Madelyn.Dorta. And you can find all of our work on wrightwoodstudios.com. We have all of our social media links there. And yeah, you can check out our podcast, Meteor City and Covencast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever else anyone listens to podcasts, you can find us.
Amazing. Madelyn, thank you so much. I'm going to
No
stop
problem.
recording
Thank
now,
you.
but let me just end this. Thanks again.